I stood near the entrance of the St. Regis ballroom, holding a gold-embossed invitation that felt heavier than lead. Inside, the place was packed with high society types in tuxedos and designer gowns, sipping vintage champagne. And then there was me, wearing a faded navy jacket I'd bought off a clearance rack for years ago, with threadbare cuffs and a zipper that stuck halfway up. "Look at him," a woman in diamonds whispered to her husband, not bothering to lower her voice. "Isn't that Chloe's house husband?" "Ex-husband," the man corrected with a smirk. "Word is she threw him out of the penthouse 3 days ago. I can't believe he actually showed up." Before I could turn around, heavy, rhythmic footsteps echoed against the marble floor. 15 towering men in black suits and tactical earpieces moved in, forming a tight semicircle around me. At the center of them stood Ethan Cross, wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, holding a glass of wine. He looked at me like I was something he'd just stepped in. "Richard, my man," Ethan grinned, strolling up to me. "I've got to hand it to you. You've got some nerve showing up here." "Chloe sent me an invitation," I said flatly. "She sent it so you could see what a real man looks like," Ethan sneered, stepping into my personal space. "You were just keeping her bed warm while I was expanding my business overseas. Look at you. You couldn't even afford a decent suit to get dumped in." I looked Ethan straight in the eye. I didn't get angry. I didn't raise my voice. He thought he was a big shot because he'd landed Chloe. He had no idea that 3 years ago, when his shell company in London was about to get audited into oblivion, one phone call from me kept him out of federal prison, strictly because Chloe had cried in her sleep over him. "Enjoy the spotlight, Ethan," I said quietly. "It fades fast." Ethan's smile turned ugly. "What did you say to me?" "You heard me." "Ethan, honey, don't waste your breath on him." The velvet curtain parted, and Chloe Vance stepped out. She looked stunning in a custom Vera Wang gown with a 10-foot train. But when her eyes met mine, they were colder than ice. She walked over, her heels clicking sharp against the floor, and looked down her nose at me. "Richard, you actually had the nerve to come. You asked me to be here, Chloe. I wanted you to see reality." Chloe snapped, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the room. "Look around you, Richard. Ethan is a self-made tech mogul who just pulled off a multi-million-dollar merger. And you? You spent the last 3 years folding my laundry, cooking my meals, and wasting your life. You have no drive, no money, and no future. Is that really all the last 3 years meant to you?" I asked. "The last 3 years were a massive mistake," she said coldly. She turned to the head of the security team. "Captain, keep him right here. If he takes one step toward the aisle, break his legs, and throw him into the street. I won't let a loser ruin my wedding." The captain nodded and slammed his hand onto my shoulder, forcing me down. The rest of the guards stepped up, locking me in place. Around us, guests pulled out their phones, snapping photos and chuckling at the sight of Chloe's washed-up ex being held like a stray dog. I didn't fight back. I just met Chloe's eyes and let out a faint, quiet laugh. "What's so funny?" she demanded. "You really think I'm nothing without you, don't you?" I asked softly. "You aren't," she said, turning her back on me. "You're a nobody, Richard. And today, I'm taking my life back." She took Ethan's arm and walked down the aisle toward the altar. The crowd clapped enthusiastically. The priest stepped up to his podium, clearing his throat. "Dearly beloved," the priest began, "we are gathered here today to unite Chloe Vance and Ethan Cross in holy matrimony." Ethan glanced back at me over his shoulder, throwing me a victorious, mocking wink. "Do you, Ethan Cross, take Chloe Vance to be your lawful wedded wife?" "I do," Ethan said loudly. "And do you, Chloe Vance, take Ethan Cross to be your—" Boom. The heavy oak doors at the back of the hall slammed open so hard the brass handles rattled against the wall. The solemn organ music abruptly cut off. Evelyn Reed, the chief operating officer of the Vance Group and Chloe's top executive, ran into the room. Her hair was a mess, her heels were missing, and her face was pale as chalk. "Stop! Stop the wedding!" Evelyn screamed, her voice cracking across the silent ballroom. Chloe spun around, her brows furrowed in pure rage. "Evelyn, have you lost your mind? What are you doing?" "Miss Vance, we're ruined." Evelyn fell onto her knees right in the middle of the aisle, holding a trembling tablet in her hands. 30 seconds ago, Stone Capital issued an emergency press release. Ethan scoffed from the altar. "Stone Capital? The massive equity firm? What does that have to do with us?" "Their chairman, Chairman Stone." Evelyn choked out, tears bursting from her eyes. He just signed an executive order pulling out every single cent of our strategic funding. All $16.5 billion. They're liquidating our credit lines and demanding full repayment of all loans within 2 hours. The entire room went dead silent. Chloe's face turned ghastly white. What? What did you just say? 16.5 billion? That's our entire operating capital. If they pull that, Vance Group goes bankrupt before dinner. She ran down the aisle, grabbing Evelyn by the shoulders. Why would Stone Capital do this to us? I've never even met Chairman Stone. Evelyn slowly raised a shaking finger, pointing past the stage, past the champagne tower, straight at the corner of the room. At me, standing in my cheap navy jacket, held down by 15 bodyguards. Because, Evelyn sobbed, her voice echoing in the dead quiet room. Because Richard. I asked Chairman Stone. For 5 agonizing seconds, nobody in the room breathed. Evelyn, what the hell are you talking about? Ethan barked, letting out a forced, nervous laugh. This bum, Chairman Stone, he's been living off Chloe's pocket money for 3 years. He doesn't even own a decent car. Shut your mouth, Ethan. Evelyn snapped back, her voice shaking with terror. She swiped her finger across her tablet, beaming the official document onto the massive LED screen behind the altar. There it was, the unmistakable crest of Stone Capital Group, embedded with a digital seal from the federal banking syndicate. At the bottom, signed in sharp, aggressive cursive, was the name Richard Stone, founder executive chairman. Directly under it was a short, brutal clause, effective immediately upon my formal departure from the Vance household. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Oh my God, it's really him? Wait, so Vance Group didn't blow up because of Chloe's tech vision? It was Stone Capital backing her all along. Sell the stock. Sell everything right now. Pandemonium broke out. High society guests started yelling into their phones, shouting at their brokers to dump Vance Group shares before the market closed. I looked at the captain holding my left arm. His face was drained of color, his hands shaking so hard I could feel the tremor through my sleeve. "Yes, sir," the captain stammered, instantly letting go of me and taking a step back. "Mr. Stone, we were just following orders." "Get off him," Ethan yelled, marching toward the guards. "Are you idiots taking orders from a piece of paper? He's a fraud. Call security and throw him out." I didn't say a word. I slowly unzipped my faded navy jacket, slipped my arms out, and dropped it onto the floor. Underneath, I was wearing a black tailored shirt with raw diamond cuff links, the signature emblem of Stone Capital's inner circle. I straightened my cuffs and looked at the guards. "Step back." The captain and all 14 bodyguards immediately dropped to their knees, bowing their heads toward the marble floor. "We're sorry, Chairman." Chloe staggered backward, her heavy dress nearly tripping her. Her eyes were wide, darting between the document on the screen and me. Memory after memory seemed to hit her like a freight train. The random $5 billion angel investment that saved her startup 3 years ago. The endless string of multi-million-dollar government contracts that miraculously landed on her desk whenever her company was about to go under. "Richard," Chloe's voice cracked. She took a hesitant step toward me. "You're Chairman Stone? Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Tell you?" I took a deliberate step forward. "Chloe, 3 years ago, I decided to step away from Wall Street to see if someone could love me for who I was, not my net worth. I cooked your meals, I did your laundry, and whenever Vance Group hit a wall, I cleared the path from behind the scenes." I stopped right in front of her, keeping my voice dead steady. "And what did you do the second Ethan came back? You called me a penniless loser. You threw a divorce agreement in my face. And today, you hired 15 men to break my legs if I made a scene. No, no, Richard, listen to me." Chloe panicked. She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my sleeve. "I didn't know. Ethan told me he was the one pulling strings for those government contracts. He lied to me. I was confused. Richard, I still love you. We can fix this. Fix this." I looked down at her hand on my arm. "You just gave your vows to Ethan. I take them back. The wedding is off." Chloe yelled, tearing off her diamond tiara and violently shoving Ethan away as he tried to approach her. "Ethan, get the hell away from me. You lying piece of trash. Richard, please. If you pull 16.5 billion, Vance Group goes bankrupt in less than 2 hours. My family loses everything." Ethan fell to his knees beside her, his face covered in cold sweat. His family had leveraged all their assets to back this merger. If Vance Group collapsed, the Cross family was going to federal prison for debt default. Mr. Stone, Chairman Stone, Ethan begged, slapping his own face right in front of everyone. I was blind. I'm a scumbag. I didn't know who you were. Please, don't destroy my family's business. I'll leave the country today. I'll never talk to Chloe again. I ignored Ethan entirely and turned my head toward Evelyn. Evelyn, I called out. Evelyn practically threw herself onto the floor. Yes, Chairman Stone. Initiate a short squeeze on all cross-holding stock. By 4 p.m., I want Vance Group delisted and cross-holdings pushed into involuntary liquidation. Right away, sir. Evelyn scrambled to execute the command on her tablet. Richard, no. Please, I'm begging you. Chloe cried, dropping to her knees and grabbing the hem of my trousers. Tears smeared her mascara down her pale cheeks. You loved me for 3 years. How can you be this heartless? I didn't destroy your company. Chloe, I said, leaning down slightly, so only she could hear my voice. You did. You thought you were throwing away trash, when you were actually throwing away the only reason you were standing on that stage. I pulled my leg out of her grip, turned around, and walked toward the exit. The heavy glass doors of the St. Regis swung open. Outside, the loud whir of helicopter blades filled the air. A convoy of 12 jet-black Rolls-Royce Phantoms, escorted by police motorcycles, pulled up right along the red carpet. An elderly man in a bespoke suit stepped out of the lead Phantom, holding a black umbrella. It was Duke Harrison, the senior partner of the European banking syndicate. Harrison walked inside, completely ignoring Chloe and Ethan weeping on the floor, and bowed deeply before me in front of every stunned socialite in the hall. Welcome back, boss, Harrison said loudly. The board is assembled in Zurich. We await your orders. Let's go, I said. I stepped into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. Behind me, Chloe's desperate screams and Ethan's wails were cut off completely as the heavy door clicked shut. Rain pounded against the high-rise windows of the Vance Group headquarters, but the storm inside was far worse. Federal auditors and bank representatives lined the hallways, sticking yellow asset seizure tags onto art pieces, computers, and leather chairs. The stock had lost 95% of its value in 3 hours. Ethan Cross had already been dragged out in handcuffs by federal agents after auditors discovered his overseas tech firm was just an illegal offshore shell company designed to drain Vance Group's accounts. Chloe Vance sat on the carpet of her gutted executive office, staring blankly at her dirty white wedding dress. Miss Vance. Her junior secretary, Lisa, timidly walked in, holding a rusted iron lockbox. We were clearing out the chairman's private vault in the basement, and we found this hidden behind Mr. Stone's old desk. Chloe blinked slowly. Richard's desk? Yes. It was locked from the inside, but the locksmith opened it. Lisa set the box down and quickly left. Chloe crawled over on her hands and knees, pulling back the heavy lid. Inside were no stock certificates or gold bars. There were only stacks of medical records, signed legal contracts, and private bank receipts. She picked up the file on top. It was an ICU medical report from 3 years ago. Date, November 14th. Patient, Chloe Vance. Diagnosis, massive internal bleeding following severe vehicular trauma. Blood type, AB negative, critical shortage. Chloe remembered that night vividly. She had woken up in the ICU after a head-on collision, and doctors told her an anonymous donor had given nearly 1,500 cubic centimeters of rare AB-negative blood over 5 hours to keep her alive. When she asked who saved her, Ethan had shown up at her bedside, claiming he had used his family's medical network to fly in a donor from London. Chloe flipped to the bottom page of the medical release form. There, signed in faded blue ink, was a familiar name, Richard Stone. Stapled to the back was a doctor's handwritten note. Mr. Stone, donating this volume of blood while suffering from severe exhaustion will permanently weaken your body. You will likely suffer chronic joint pain and fatigue during cold weather. Chloe's heart slammed into her ribs. The paper shook in her hands. For the last 3 winters, Richard's hands had turned pale, and he had limped slightly whenever the temperature dropped below freezing. She had snapped at him every single time, calling him lazy, weak, and pathetic for complaining about a little chill. He had never defended himself. He had just gone to the kitchen, made her dinner, and wrapped a warm blanket around her shoulders. No, 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 Chloe sobbed, tears spilling over the pages. Ethan didn't save me. Richard gave me his blood. She grabbed the next file. It was a maritime release agreement from 2 years ago, when Vance Group's cargo fleet was impounded in international waters due to a customs dispute. Ethan had claimed he called in a favor from a senator. According to the legal document in her hand, Richard had personally signed over a $300 million offshore deepwater rig to the shipping union to clear her ships within 6 hours. There were 48 files in the box. 48 times Richard had saved her company, her reputation, and her life, all while stepping aside so Ethan could take the credit, and so she could feel like an invincible corporate queen. Aya, Chloe screamed into the empty room, clutching the files against her chest as she broke down into violent, hysterical weeping. I killed him. I drove away the only man who ever loved me. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring her bare, bleeding feet, and ran out of the building into the freezing rain. She hailed a cab and threw her mother's diamond ring at the driver. Take me to 4th Street. Hurry. 20 minutes later, she threw herself out of the cab and sprinted up 6 flights of stairs in a rundown apartment building where Richard used to rent a small room before moving into her penthouse. She pounded frantically on the rusted steel door. Richard, open the door. I read the files. I know everything now. Please, I was wrong. I'm sorry. Open the door. The door clicked open. An elderly landlord stepped out, looking at her ragged appearance with a mix of confusion and pity. Lady, stop screaming, the old man said. Mr. Stone cleared out his room this morning. Where did he go? Chloe cried, grabbing his arms. Where is he? How should I know? He bought this whole building 3 years ago anyway, the landlord sighed, reaching into his pocket. He just told me if a woman in a wedding dress came looking for him, to hand her this. Chloe snatched the black envelope from his hand and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of heavy parchment in Richard's sharp handwriting. Chloe, when I met you 3 years ago, I thought I found a woman who cared about the man behind the title. I hid my status because I wanted a real life, not a corporate alliance. I gave you my blood, my capital, and my time. You gave Ethan my credit and gave me 15 guards. Do not look for me. We were never in the same league. Richard Stone. Chloe fell against the concrete wall, sliding down into a puddle of rainwater as the letter slipped from her fingers. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A automated news push popped up on her screen. Wall Street Journal. Stone Capital announces emergency shareholders assembly tomorrow at 9 a.m. Chairman Richard Stone to personally preside over the final acquisition and liquidation of Vance Group. Chloe wiped her face frantically with her sleeve, a desperate, wild look in her eyes. The shareholders' assembly. She whispered, her voice cracking. He'll be there. I can still talk to him. The 88th floor of the Stone Capital Tower was suffocatingly quiet. 30 of Wall Street's most powerful institutional investors, hedge fund managers, and board members sat around the dark mahogany table, barely daring to breathe. Chloe Vance sat in the far corner, wearing a wrinkled black suit she had borrowed from a neighbor. She looked hollow, her eyes red and swollen. Beside her sat 3 disgraced Vance Group directors who were facing total bankruptcy. At 9 a.m. sharp, the heavy double doors opened. Victoria Sterling, the ruthless corporate restructurer known as Wall Street's Valkyrie, walked in first. Right behind her was Richard. He wore a bespoke charcoal gray suit, his dark hair swept back, looking every bit the ruthless titan who controlled billions. The sheer aura he radiated made every board member in the room stand up instantly. Chairman Stone, the room said in unison, bowing as he took his seat at the head of the table. Chloe's breath hitched. She stared at him across the long table, her heart slamming against her ribs. He felt like a complete stranger now, an untouchable ruler who occupied a world far above hers. Richard, Chloe stammered, scrambling to her feet. Richard, please, I need to talk to you about. Miss Vance, Victoria interrupted, her tone icy and professional as she swiped on her tablet. You are attending this assembly as a non-voting representative of an insolvent entity. Sit down and speak only when spoken to. I am his ex-fiancée, Chloe yelled, ignoring Victoria and staring straight at Richard. Richard, tell them. Tell them you know me. Richard didn't even look up. He picked up his coffee cup, took a quiet sip, and set it down. Miss Vance, Richard said flatly, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. In this room, there are no personal ties, only balance sheets. The words hit Chloe like a slap across the face. Victoria tapped her screen, projecting a massive ledger onto the wall. As of 8:30 a.m. today, Stone Capital acquired 100% of Vance Group's outstanding debt. We are exercising our legal right to convert that debt into equity. Effective immediately, Vance Group is dissolved and absorbed into our subsidiary, Titan Holdings. Hold on a minute. Arthur Cross, Ethan's father, stood up from the middle of the table, his face flushed red. Chairman Stone, my family poured $40 million into Vance Group shares 2 days ago. You're wiping us out completely. You can't just destroy us like this. Richard finally shifted his eyes toward Arthur. Arthur Cross, Richard said calmly. 3 years ago, you used 3 shell companies in the Caymans to siphon pension funds. Yesterday morning, you attempted to short Vance Group using insider information your son stole from Chloe's laptop. Richard tapped his index finger once against the mahogany wood. The boardroom doors swung open. For federal marshals and SEC agents walked straight past the executives, heading directly for Arthur. Arthur Cross, you're under arrest for wire fraud, securities manipulation, and grand larceny, the lead agent declared, slapping heavy steel handcuffs onto Arthur's wrists. No, get your hands off me, Arthur screamed, thrashing wildly as the agents dragged him toward the exit. Richard Stone, you set us up. You set my whole family up. The remaining directors shrank into their chairs, trembling in utter terror. No one dared to say a single word. Richard turned his gaze back to Chloe. Miss Vance, Richard said, his tone devoid of any emotion. Your gross negligence as CEO created over $2 billion in personal liability. I won't press criminal charges against you, out of respect for your late father, who was an honorable man. Chloe's eyes flickered with a desperate spark of hope. Richard, you still remember my dad? You still care? However, Richard continued, instantly crushing that spark. All your personal assets, real estate, and equity are seized today. You are permanently barred from holding an officer position in any public company. No. Chloe collapsed back into her chair, her voice breaking. You're taking away everything I am. Victoria, Richard turned to the woman beside him. Rehire the lower-level staff Vance Group laid off last week. Double their severance packages and cover their insurance. Right away, boss. Victoria smiled warmly, leaning down gracefully to adjust Richard's lapel in front of the entire room. Your jet to the European Economic Summit leaves at 6. Good. Richard stood up, buttoning his jacket. As he walked toward the door, Chloe threw herself out of her chair and dropped to her knees on the floor, grabbing the bottom of his suit pants, sobbing hysterically. Richard, please, don't leave me like this, she wailed, tears smearing across her face. I don't care about the money. I'll clean the house. I'll cook for you. I'll do whatever you want. Just look at me like you used to. Richard stopped. He didn't kick her away. He simply looked down at her with cold, empty eyes. Chloe, he said quietly, 3 years ago, I gave you my heart, and you threw it away because it wasn't wrapped in gold paper. Today, you want me back because you realize the man you threw away owns the world. He pulled his leg back, freeing his pants from her grip. I'm not something you can toss out when you're rich and beg for when you're broke. You made your choice at the wedding. Richard walked through the double doors without looking back, Victoria by his side, as the heavy glass doors clicked shut, locking Chloe out of his life forever. 3 weeks after the bankruptcy filing, freezing December rain hit the streets of Manhattan. Chloe Vance shuffled down the sidewalk in a threadbare coat she'd bought at a thrift shop using her last $20. Her phone service had been cut off. The socialites who used to invite her to Hampton's galas had blocked her number the minute federal marshals seized her penthouse. Desperate, shivering, and running out of options, a memory suddenly flickered in her mind. The St. James estate. 2 years ago, Richard had taken her to an estate in upstate New York, a massive, gated property with rolling hills and a stone chateau. At the time, Richard had pointed at the gates and said, Chloe, if the world ever gets too loud, this is where we can retire. She had laughed in his face, telling him, dream on, Richard. That place costs $300 million. You couldn't afford the property taxes on the driveway. Chloe's eyes lit up with frantic hope. He said it was ours. He must have left a key there. He wouldn't leave me with nothing. She scraped together her remaining change, snuck onto an upstate train, and walked 3 miles through the slush until she reached the wrought iron gates of the St. James estate. The stone house was glowing with warm light against the dark forest. Chloe ran up to the gate, frantically slamming her palm against the intercom button. "Open up. I'm Chloe Vance. I'm the mistress of this house," she yelled into the speaker, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. A moment later, the heavy iron gate clicked and unlocked. An elderly butler in a sharp black suit stepped out, followed by 2 large German shepherds on short leashes. "Miss Vance," the butler said flatly, "you are trespassing." "Trespassing?" Chloe shrieked, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Richard bought this place for us. Tell him I'm here. Tell him Chloe is waiting outside." The butler took a leather-bound folder from under his arm and opened it under the lantern light. "Miss Vance, this estate was purchased 6 years ago by Stone Capital, a full 3 years before Chairman Stone ever met you. It is held under his private family trust." He flipped to the deed page. The sole owner listed was Richard Stone. Chloe stared at the paper, her knees giving out as she hit the slush. 6 years ago? He owned this 6 years ago. He wasn't dreaming. He was telling me the truth. "Chairman Stone never lied to you, Miss Vance," the butler said, his voice entirely devoid of warmth. "You simply refused to believe anything that didn't come with a price tag you understood. Let me inside, just for 5 minutes." Chloe begged, reaching through the iron bars to grab the butler's sleeve. "It's freezing. I don't have anywhere else to go. Please, tell him I'm sorry." The butler stepped back, pulling his coat away from her wet fingers. "I spoke with the chairman on the phone an hour ago," the butler said calmly. "I asked if we should set a plate for you in case you showed up." Chloe looked up, her bloodshot eyes wide with hope. What did he say?" "He gave me a very specific instruction," the butler replied. "He said, the St. James estate is private property. Stray dogs and Chloe Vance are not permitted on the premises." The butler turned on his heel and pressed a remote control in his pocket. Clang! The iron gates slammed shut, and the heavy security bolt locked into place. The perimeter lights flipped to automated security mode, red beams sweeping the driveway. "No, Richard, open the gate," Chloe screamed, beating her bare fists against the iron bars until her skin split and bled against the cold metal. "Richard, please." Nobody answered. The dogs didn't even bark as the butler walked back toward the warm lights of the house. That night, Chloe slept under the plastic overhang of a closed gas station 3 miles down the road, shivering under a stack of damp cardboard boxes. Across the street, a massive digital billboard blazed through the snowstorm, broadcasting the midnight financial news. Wall Street Journal. Stone Capital closes historic $50 billion energy acquisition. Chairman Richard Stone named Global Business Person of the Year. On the screen, Richard stood beside European heads of state, signing a massive treaty with a gold fountain pen, surrounded by flashing cameras and applause. Chloe stared up at the giant glowing screen from her pile of wet cardboard. She finally understood. He hadn't lost anything when she walked away. She had traded away an empire for a man who belonged in a federal penitentiary. She pulled the damp cardboard closer to her chin, sobbing silently into the dark as the snow buried her boots. 6 months later, the International Economic Summit was held at the Waldorf Astoria in Washington, D.C. It was the premier event of the year, bringing together foreign dignitaries, central bankers, and Fortune 500 CEOs. Outside the grand ballroom, security was airtight. Secret Service agents and private detail manned every door. Down in the service hallway, Chloe Vance leaned against her mop bucket, wearing a stained janitor's jumpsuit. After her blacklisting, no legitimate company would touch her. She had ended up working night shifts for an outsourced sanitation company, scrubbing toilets for $12 an hour. A loud cheer erupted near the main floor entrance, followed by the rapid flash of news cameras. "He's here. Chairman Stone is heading in." Chloe froze. Her hands shook against the aluminum mop handle. Driven by an overwhelming, desperate impulse, she dropped her broom, ducked past an unattended service curtain, and snuck into the back row of the main auditorium. The room was packed with 3,000 world leaders. Standing at the center podium under the glaring spotlights was Richard. He wore a dark navy suit with subtle gold threading, looking every bit like the titan who pulled the strings of the global economy. Beside him stood Victoria Sterling, handling his executive briefs. When Richard raised his hand, the entire room fell dead silent. The future of global markets. Richard spoke into the microphone, his clear, calm voice carrying through the high-grade speakers, will not be driven by empty speculation, but by real, sustainable infrastructure. Effective today, Stone Capital is deploying $100 billion into sovereign development funds. The room burst into thunderous applause. Prime ministers and chief executives stood up from their seats, clapping enthusiastically. Chloe stared at the man on stage. This was a leader who dictated the financial future of nations. And 3 years ago, this same man had washed her dinner plates, packed her lunchboxes, and massaged her feet when she complained about a bad day at work. The sheer weight of her regret snapped the last thread of her sanity. "Richard!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, shoving past 2 bewildered venue ushers and charging down the center aisle. The applause abruptly died. 3,000 heads snapped toward the aisle in shock. Chloe ran toward the stage, her bleach-stained jumpsuit covered in dirt, her hair matted, tears streaking down her unwashed face. "Richard, it's me, Chloe," she sobbed frantically, dropping to her knees right at the foot of the stage and pounding her forehead against the bottom step. Bang, bang, bang. I was wrong. I was wrong about everything, she wailed, her cracking voice echoing through the open broadcast mics. "I don't want the money. I don't care about Vance Group. I just want you back. Hit me, spit on me, do whatever you want. But please, just give me one more chance. Look at me." 6 armed Secret Service agents instantly moved in, drawing their sidearms and rushing forward to tackle her. Richard raised 2 fingers. The agents halted on the spot, stepping back. Richard slowly walked down the wooden steps of the stage. He stopped 3 feet away from the weeping woman on the carpet. Every broadcast camera in the room zoomed in, beaming the scene live to hundreds of millions of viewers across the globe. "Chloe," Richard said softly. "Richard." Chloe raised her face, her bloodshot eyes filled with wild, manic hope. You hear me? You remember me?" "I remember," Richard said quietly, his voice picked up by his lapel mic. "I remember 3 years of complete loyalty. I held up your entire life while you called me a parasite. I know. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry," she sobbed, crawling forward to grab his shoe. "I regret it every single day, Richard. I'm dying of regret." Richard smoothly stepped back, avoiding her touch without a hint of hesitation. "Chloe," he said, looking straight into her eyes with total indifference. "I didn't fail you 3 years ago. I simply gave you enough rope to show the world who you really were. You didn't lose me because you were poor. You lost me because you were blind." He turned his head toward the head of security. "Take her out." "No. Richard, no. Don't do this to me," Chloe shrieked as 4 heavy security guards grabbed her arms, hoisting her off the floor. She kicked and screamed, her fingernails scratching uselessly against the carpet as they dragged her away. "Richard, I love you. I've always loved you." Richard didn't turn back. He adjusted his cuffs, walked back up to the podium, and tapped the microphone once. "My apologies for the interruption," Richard said smoothly to the silent crowd of world leaders. "As I was saying regarding our international asset allocation." The auditorium erupted into applause once more, completely drowning out the desperate, muffled wails of Chloe Vance as she was tossed into the alleyway out back. By nightfall, the footage had gone viral across every major network on Earth. A permanent, public record of the woman who threw away an empire, now remembered only as the biggest fool in corporate history. 2 years after the summit, a heavy snow fell over Zurich, Switzerland. On the top floor of Stone Capital's global headquarters, the floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the quiet city lights. Victoria Sterling walked into the executive office holding a leather-bound annual ledger, setting it down on my desk. "Boss," Victoria said, her tone sharp and confident. "Stone Capital's assets under management officially hit $3.5 trillion this morning. The acquisition of European Central Logistics is complete, and Titan Holdings just locked up 90% of the clean energy patents globally." "Good work, Victoria," I said, leaning back in my chair and taking a quiet sip of scotch. "What about our open files in New York?" Ethan Cross was transferred to a maximum security federal facility in upstate Pennsylvania last week, Victoria reported without a trace of emotion. He received 25 years without parole for securities fraud and money laundering. His family assets were entirely liquidated to pay back defrauded investors. I set my glass down. And Chloe Vance. Victoria pulled up a brief on her tablet. After the incident in D.C., she was placed on the federal blacklist for high-profile security disruptions. No corporate entity or private agency will hire her. She's currently working 6 days a week at a municipal waste management plant near Albany. Victoria paused for a second before continuing. She lives in a tiny basement apartment with no heating. Every evening after her shift, local residents see her sitting at the bus stop 3 miles outside the St. James estate, holding a dirty, threadbare navy jacket. She sits there for hours until the night guard tells her to move along. Does she cause any trouble? I asked. Not anymore, Victoria said softly. The local clinic notes say she suffers from severe psychological trauma. Whenever she sees a black sedan drive by, she runs into the snow screaming your name until her voice gives out. She has nothing left, Richard. I looked out at the falling snow over Zurich. She picked her side at the wedding, Victoria. She just has to live with the bill. Understood, boss. Victoria bowed slightly, taking the ledger off the desk. Your private transport to the Geneva Economic Conference is ready on the helipad. Let's go then, I said, putting on my coat. We walked up the internal staircase to the roof. The twin engines of the Eurocopter were already roaring against the freezing wind, the gold crest of Stone Capitol gleaming against the dark air. The pilot saluted as I stepped inside the heated cabin. The heavy door closed with a solid, airtight latch. Below me, half a world away, a broken woman sat on a wooden bench in the freezing rain, clutching a ragged piece of cloth to her chest, sobbing silently into the dark as the snow buried her footprints. She had traded away a king for a fraud and spent every second of her remaining life realizing what she had done. And high above the clouds, the empire I built kept moving forward, never looking back.